Interested in learning about wine, but not sure where to start? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Cork and Fizz Guide to Wine podcast. I'm your host, Haley Bowman, and I'm so glad you're here. I'm a wine enthusiast turned wine educator and founder of the Seattle-based wine tasting business, Cork and Fizz. It is my goal to build your confidence in wine by making it approachable and lots of fun. You can expect to learn everything from how to describe your favorite wine to what to pair with dinner tonight, and so much more. Whether you're a casual wine sipper or a total cork dork like myself, this podcast is for you. So grab yourself a glass and let's dive in. In today's episode, I'll be answering your top wine questions. I put a little question sticker on my Instagram stories. If you're not already following me, be sure to check it out at Cork and Fizz. And you delivered with some amazing wine questions. I will definitely be doing another one of these in the future. So if more questions pop up as I'm answering these questions, write them down, send them to me, find me on Instagram at Cork and Fizz, or you can email them to me directly, Haley at Cork and Fizz. I seriously love answering questions about wine, so you would just be making me so happy by sending me more questions to answer. Before we get into it, I want to give a quick reminder. If you're not on my mailing list yet, I would love for you to join. When you join, you will get a free shopping guide that has 15 of my favorite wines under $15. You can head to corkandfizz.com, scroll to the bottom, and there'll be a little section where you can join the mailing list. I send out a weekly newsletter. It's filled with wine tips, recommendations, special offers, and so much more. Also, being on my mailing list, it means you are the first people to find out about any new offers that I have coming up, and you get the best deals. Also, be sure to check out my virtual tasting club, The Cork Crew. If you've enjoyed listening to this and you're like, how amazing would it be to drink wine with Haley? Well, come join The Cork Crew and you can find out. We get together every month. We try new wines and learn from others in the wine world. We have some amazing winemakers coming in the next coming months. So head to my website, corkandfizz.com/thecorkcrew, and you can use code WINE101 when you sign up to get your first month free. Now, without further ado, let's get into these questions. So I have 16 questions I'm going to try to get through during this episode. Let's see if we can do it. Question number 1. What is the best way to learn about wine and to develop the ability to describe wine flavors and aromas? So my first thing I'm going to say, go check out the first episode of this podcast, my 4-step wine tasting process. Then once you know that, taste a ton of wine. When possible, try 2 wines side by side. That way you can compare a little bit more and it's a little easier to kind of distinguish things and pull different things out. Read about the wines before you taste them. You don't even need to go out and buy a book. Just go search on Google and if you're trying a Oregon Pinot Noir, just type in Oregon Pinot Noir and one of the first few things that pop up will likely tell you a little bit about it. You're not looking for like what specific tasting notes you should be getting, right? Because you could even look up the producer of the wine, right? And a lot of times they'll say exactly what they think you should taste in the wine, but that's what they're tasting and you might get something different and that's fine. I think it's more fun to look a bottle up because for one, you might not even know what grape is used in the wine. So, you could look it up for that. Maybe you want to know about, where the grapes were grown, what winemaking practices they did. There's a lot you can do by simply just researching the wine that you are tasting. Next, if you're wanting to develop this ability to describe flavors and aromas, you need to develop an aroma dictionary. And the way to do this is that you just smell a lot of things and then you describe them. You become that weirdo at the grocery store who smells the oranges before you purchase them. Or farmers markets are a great place to do this as well. But you're essentially, you're going to start smelling things and paying attention to the smell and not just smelling it, but then you need to describe it. This was something that I thought was so interesting. I think it was in the Cork Dork book that when she went and talked to these experts on the nose and they were teaching people who had lost their sense of smell to how to re-smell. And this is what they would have them do. They would smell. They actually made like little like concoctions of like aromas. So it was just like a liquid, kind of like oh, what are those called? The herbal elements or something like that. God, that's probably not right. I can't think of it, but you get the idea. The aromatherapy stuff. There we go. So you can use those too, but you could also just use like food and flowers and earth and whatnot. So when you smell something, so let's say you're eating an apple, before you take a bite, smell the apple. Think about what that smell is. Try to put words to it. Can you describe it? Then when you take a bite of the apple after you swallow it, smell the apple now. What does it smell like? Is it, fresh? Is it woodsy? Is it citrusy? Is it, it's gonna be hard at first to come up with the words, but I think the more you do it, the easier it'll be. And so the more you do this, the more you develop that aroma dictionary. So then later on, you recognize that smell when you smell it in wine. And of course, shameless promotion here. If you are interested in learning how to taste wine and describe wine flavors and aromas, come join my cork crew or take a private tasting with me, Cork and Fizz. Or do both. That sounds fun. Okay, next question. I smell my wine before sipping, but I don't know why. What am I supposed to be smelling? Great question. There's so many things that I think we do with wine because we think we're supposed to. Like, I'm supposed to swirl it, right? Why do I swirl it? Or like after they, at a restaurant when they open the bottle of wine and they leave the cork with you, it's like, I'm supposed to smell the cork, right? But like, why? So this is specifically, so they're talking about smelling the wine before they sip it, which yes, you definitely should. But what are you supposed to be smelling for? You are smelling for the flavor, because here's the thing. Most of the flavor of wine and anything you eat or drink comes from your nose. So the way to test this, and I'm not totally crazy, next time you're drinking wine, plug your nose just like this and take a sip of the wine. Don't unplug your nose until you've swallowed the wine. Tastes pretty different, right? It's the same reason why when you have a cold and your nose is all stuffed up that food usually doesn't taste as good. It's because you're not able to get the flavor, which is coming from your nose, believe it or not. So when we are smelling wine before we're sipping, we're pulling out all of those aromas and we're pulling out the flavor of the wine. Next question. How can I figure out what wines I like? So this one, again, very similar to the first question. Taste a lot of wines and take a lot of notes. In my wine tasting process, I have 4 steps. So you look at the wine, you smell the wine, you taste the wine. But step number 4 is you think about the wine. And this is where I always tell people to pay attention to. And when you're thinking about the wine, you're thinking about, did you like it? Did you not like it? What was it that you liked or didn't like? Now, the very first wine that you do this with, it might not be obvious what you liked, right? You might just be like, it was good. I don't know. What do you want me to tell you? But after you taste more and more wines, and if you start to really pay attention and take notes and go through the wine tasting process with each of these, you'll start to notice some similarities. So with a really great story with this one, I think is really interesting is my mom. When she first started drinking wine, she primarily drank sweet wines. She knew she liked sweet wines, drank a lot of Moscato. But as a lovely supporter of everything that I do, she has since joined the Cork Crew Tasting Club and has also gone on with me to Walla Walla and done some private tastings. Needless to say, she has tried a lot of different wines since then. And what was interesting was, I always think it's such a fun thing to try to figure out what people like and don't like. And it was this mystery because we kept trying to figure out, she didn't like red wines for a while because she didn't like the tannin, right? We knew it was like that drying sensation, but soon that wasn't a problem. She got used to it and really enjoyed it. And then it was something about, because I thought, going from sweet white wine, that maybe it'd be a good idea to get her into just like less sweet, just more fruity white wines. Some of them worked, but some of them didn't. And it took a little while for us to figure out. And then with red wines, I'm like, oh, well, the first ones we should introduce you to are like lower tannin. So I'd be like, a Pinot Noir, right? Is something lower tannin, but it wasn't her thing. And then she tried a Merlot and she loved it. And so we had to kind of go back through the notes about each of the wines that she tasted and what stood out. And pretty soon we realized she doesn't like high acidic wines. all of those, those white wines that might have been fruity, they also had a lot of acidity. And the sweetness, the reason she liked the sweet wine is because it covered the acidity. And she likes a Merlot more than a Pinot Noir because it is less acidic. So again, this might take time, and be okay with that. But the more you take notes and the more you pay attention and go through the 4 steps of the wine tasting process when you are tasting wines, and then, pay attention to what you like and don't like, you'll start to be able to do that. Also, don't be afraid to ask for help. If it's not obvious, I love talking about wine. So feel free to reach out to me on Instagram, email me, Haley@Cork and Fizz, and talk to me. Tell me what you like, what you don't like. And just like I said, I think it's a really fun puzzle and a mystery to kind of figure that out. So I'd love to help you as well. Next question. How can I properly store wine at home to ensure it ages well and doesn't go bad? So there are some things to avoid when you're storing wine. This is a good place to start. So things to avoid. You want to avoid light, especially sunlight. You want to avoid warm temperatures, or more specifically, constantly fluctuating temperatures. Those are even worse than the warm temperatures. The reason you don't like the warm temperature is that if it gets warm, I believe what happens is, like, I think the cork expands in the bottle, or the wine expands. Something happens where the cork expands. And then when it gets cooler again, the cork shrinks. And so then it's actually going to start letting in a bunch of oxygen. You can also, if it gets too hot, like super hot, you can cook the wine, which then it loses a lot of its fruity flavor. And this is the same thing that happens if it has too much sunlight, the light damage. So you want to avoid light. You want to avoid warm temperatures. You want to avoid vibration. So this is like if anybody puts their wine on their fridge, on top of their fridge or anything like that. You want to avoid that. You want, you are looking for the darkest, coolest, stablest area of your house to store your wine. And then you also want to avoid total lack of humidity. This is why I tell people not to put their wine in their fridge if they want it to last longer than a few weeks. If you ever have left vegetables in your fridge for too long and they dry out, that's what'll happen to the cork. And again, if that cork dries out and it starts to shrink, it lets in more oxygen and your wine goes bad. So all this to say, please, 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 please do not store your wine in the kitchen unless it is in a wine fridge. Your kitchen is just such a terrible place for wine because, one, it gets really hot when you're cooking and then it cools down when you're not. Lights are always on in there. The vibrations, if you have it on top of your fridge, it's a terrible place for it to be. And again, you don't want it in the fridge because of the lack of humidity. Your best bet for storing wine is a good quality wine fridge. Your next best bet is the darkest part of an unfinished basement. That's where I store. So I have a few wine fridges, but then I also store a lot of my wine in the part of our basement that it's actually these shelves were built in, these wooden shelves were built into the stone concrete foundation. So especially anywhere you can find stone or concrete, right? That keeps in the cool and also keeps it a very constant temperature. That's where I store a lot of my wine as well. And they're in the closet so that there's no sunlight. And I even put a dark shade over the window so we wouldn't have to worry about that. Another option is the back of a closet. Again, somewhere stable where it's going to stay dark for the most part and kind of it can stay as cool as you possibly can keep it. If those aren't really, it doesn't feel like there's a lot of options, or you have some wine that you really want to be able to age and trust that it will age well, the other option is there are off-site storages. This is where you pay. It's kind of like having a storage locker, but for your wine. And so these you can trust. They keep things at the right humidity. They keep everything at the right temperature. I have one that I basically put all the wine that I want to store and forget about and then come back to in 10 years. And so we just pay a yearly fee for them. We got our own combination lock to put on our little locker, and you can just go in and out as you please. We have a little key code to go in. And then you can also those places can accept shipments of wine if you're ever having wine shipped and you don't know if you're going to be at your house or not, right? They always have to have somebody sign for 21 plus. So it's another option. It is a little more costly, so you do have to pay for that every year, but it's very trustworthy. Okay, next up, basics of wine and food pairing. How can I get started if I know nothing? Well, this is a great place to start. Good job. You're already listening to the Cork and Fizz Guide to Wine podcast. You are in the right spot. Now, if I tried to answer this question, we'd have a very, very long episode. So instead, I'm going to recommend you go check out episode 11, Wine and Food Pairing 101, for all my tips. But the very basics, I'll get you started with the first thing. What you want to do is you want to match the intensity of the food with the intensity of your wine. You never want one to overpower the other. Then don't be afraid to try new things. I am a believer that I don't think there exists one single perfect pairing for every dish. So just be bold and try something new. When you're doing wine and food pairing, your goal is essentially just to make harmony between the food and the wine. You want the wine to slightly improve the food and the food to slightly improve the wine. You're just looking for them to, counteract and balance each other very well. You can do that with a lot of wines, and you don't need to go for a perfect pairing. It works if you're just like, that's good. That's all you need. That's what you need for wine and food pairing. So don't be afraid to try different things. And if it doesn't work, I mean, does it really matter? You'll just eat the food and then have the wine later, right? It's not the end of the world. So don't be afraid to try stuff. And then again, go check out episode 11, Wine and Food Pairing 1, for a little more in-depth answer to how to get started on wine and food pairing. There was a follow-up question to this. Well, actually, it was somebody else's question, but it feels like a good follow-up to this. How to eat with wine? Do you eat, then sip, or sip, then eat? My answer here, it doesn't matter which one you start with, as long as you are paying attention to how the flavors change. So I always say you want to do this in threes. That's what we do during my wine and food pairing classes. You want to eat and sip in threes. So if you start with a sip of wine, think about how the wine tastes. Then have a bite of food, and go back to the wine and think about how the flavor of the food changed the flavor of the wine. You can also do that the other way around. So have a bite of food, think about how the food tastes, then have a sip of wine and go back to the food and figure out how did it change the flavor of the food. The goal is essentially like if you're having like a meal, a great pairing is one where you can, have a sip, have a bite, have a sip, have a bite. And it's just a very enjoyable experience kind of going back in between the two. All right, next up, I think we're halfway, so we're making some good time. Next question. What are your thoughts on wine clubs? Which ones are worth joining? Are you in any wine clubs? Wine clubs are the best way to support your favorite wineries. It is guaranteed income for them. And so if you have some favorite ones out there, I highly recommend joining their wine club. You also get a lot of perks joining a wine club. So first off, when you join a winery's wine club, you have amazing wine, right? You would join a winery's wine club because every wine of theirs just blows your mind. That to me is like the level to which I will join a wine club. Another good reason to join the wine club, wonderful people, right? You love the people who make the wine. You want to support them. This is their guaranteed income, and this is a way for them to continue to grow as a winery. And then the other one, as I mentioned a little bit, is the fun perks and events. Oftentimes, wineries will save certain wines specifically for their wine clubs. They'll also have wine release parties and other wine club events. And they often have discounts if you want to purchase other wine outside of the club. One thing I also want to say here, because I feel like this isn't said a lot, but keep in mind you don't have to be in the wine club forever, right? This is one of those where like a lot of times I like to join a wine club and I enjoy it for a while and then maybe I want to try something new. And as much as I would love to, belong to 10, 20 wine clubs, that would be a lot of wine and that would also cost a lot of money. So it's okay to join the wine club for a little bit and then maybe realize that you want to try something else out, or you've gotten too much wine and, you need to calm it down a little bit. So there's one style of wine club, which is that is the winery. So in terms of wineries that I am a wine club member of, I'm a wine club member of Final Girl and Tatomer. These are both in Santa Barbara. It was after a Santa Barbara trip. That's the thing too, is I tend to join wine clubs after I visit somewhere. I'm trying to think if there are a few more that I used to be. So we used to be members at Matthiasen. They are in Napa Valley. And I want to say another one. I've considered Lola. Lola is again out of Napa Valley and they have just amazing wines. We love their Chenin Blanc. And then also I've been thinking about Delmas SJR Vineyard with Brooke Delmas. She was a previous guest. thinking about joining their wine club as well. So again, I kind of like, I go in between. I believe those are the only two that I'm currently, so Final Girl and Tatomer, in terms of wineries that I am a wine club member of. Now, there are also other styles of wine clubs, and these are more collections. And I really enjoy these because it allows you to do like try a variety of wine and have it sent to your door. So these are put together by either just like simply a wine club, or wine shops will do these as well. So Crunchy Red Fruit by Jackson Robaugh is one. Really enjoy that. Cascadia Wine Merchants is a new one that's on the scene, and I joined recently. They have Pacific Northwest and Canadian wine, which it is so hard to get Canadian wine in the US, so I'm really excited to try this one out. Coat Wine Club. I was part of this one for a little while, and again, this was just became one where I was like, it's too much, the cost of it just doesn't balance for me, but I still highly recommend it. It's Cote, Cote. And this is one, I believe they're based out of New York. I hope I'm not getting this wrong, but they're connected to a very popular restaurant, and it's two sommeliers that put this together, and they do a tasting every month, which is really great as well. These are like kind of your higher quality, but slightly unique wines. And then another great one that I've also been a member of in the past is called the Grand Tour. And this is done by Verve, which is again, I believe it's a bottle shop out of New York. And they always have a theme, and it's like they travel to different wine regions around the world, and you get to try wines from each of those regions. So I think that's a really cool way to try new wines. Now, there are other styles of wine clubs out there. I tend to avoid the more generic ones, the ones like Wink, Wall Street Journal, Bright Cellars. If they work for you, that's great. I just think you can get higher quality, more reliable wines for not that much more money. And then you can also support, a small business or a local winery instead of these larger ones, which when you look up the wines, sometimes aren't the highest quality wines. I've also tried Naked Wines. Mixed reviews, but it's also been a while, so they could be great. Naked Wines, when I first joined, I loved the idea behind it. It was like making wine costs a lot of money. There's a lot of startup money that is necessary for making wine. So the idea was when you became a Naked Wine member, it also sounds so funny when I keep saying naked on this podcast, but Naked Wine, you would essentially be like helping fund these winemakers who were trying to get their thing started. And so, your money would go into a pool, and then I think you would get to pick out a certain amount of wine every quarter or something like that. And I just thought it was a really cool idea and a great way to support people who were starting out. I've had some good wine, not so good wine from there. So mixed reviews, but again, it has been a while. So I'm not going to say one way or another, but feel free to check it out and see what it's like. Do you ever find yourself standing in front of the wine aisle at the grocery store, feeling completely lost and overwhelmed? Don't worry, you're not alone. But what if I told you that I have a way to transform the wine aisle from overwhelming into an endless sea of joy and discovery? And it involves drinking wine and joining the most welcoming and fun community. In my Court Crew Virtual Tasting Club, we're all about exploring new and exciting wines in a fun and supportive community. No more feeling intimidated or stuck in a rut of buying the same bottle of wine. Each month, we explore 2 new wines so you can broaden your palate and explore new flavors. Not only will we taste these wines together, but we'll learn about where the wines come from, essentially traveling the world all through the wine in our glass. Come join the Court Crew, and you'll have the opportunity to taste new wines, meet winemakers and other wine professionals, and connect with like-minded wine lovers from all over the world. Imagine the joy of discovering a new favorite wine and being able to confidently choose a bottle that you know you'll love. So, why not join us? Head to my website at corkandfizz.com/thecourtcrew to sign up. And don't forget to use code WINE101 to get your first month free. And now, back to the show. Okay, next question. How long does wine last once opened? I have in my notes here, it says more than 1 day with like lots of exclamation marks after it. So I think I really wanted to get that across. more than 1 day. If you open a bottle of wine and as long as you put a closure on it, aka the cork back on or any sort of thing over it and put it in the fridge, it will last longer than a day. Generally speaking, I give it 3 to 5 days. The reason it goes bad after 3 to 5 days is oxygen. It's caused by bacteria that turn ethanol into acetic acid. This process is called oxidation, and it what makes your wine taste sour and vinegary. So you know a wine has started to go bad if it's starting to lose its fruity flavor, it's overly acidic or sour, or all you can really taste is the alcohol in it. Those are kind of the three that, at least for me, when I go, yeah, probably time to dump this. All right, next question. Are there any health benefits to drinking red wine? So here's the thing. There are antioxidants. I'm not going to say that that isn't true. There are some antioxidants in red wine that could be good for you. However, this is the big but that's coming in. Keep in mind that wine is a drink with alcohol. And in general, alcohol is not healthy. So, my personal opinion, I wouldn't drink wine for health benefits. It's good for the soul. It treats my soul all the time when I drink it. But that's, I don't drink it for any health benefits. I love it. And honestly, you do have to take it seriously with the fact that it is alcohol. And I think also being very understanding to those that don't choose to drink it, either because they just don't want to drink alcohol. Maybe they're recovering, or they just don't want to. And that's fine. So I think just being aware that wine is an alcoholic drink. Sometimes it's, what's the word where it's like made to seem like glorified a little bit above other forms of alcohol, like hard liquor or beer. But in the end, it is still alcohol. I love the stories behind it. I will always love wine, but I'm always careful with it too, because alcohol is a poison and some people do have addictions, and just keep that in mind when you're enjoying your wine. So to answer your question, not really. They're antioxidants, but it doesn't make up for the fact that it is indeed alcohol. Next question. Why are some wines specific to regions? Great question. Predominantly in Europe, wine regions have specific rules about what can be grown in the region. And the reason they do that, and so they have rules. So for example, one of these is Bordeaux. There's a French region called Bordeaux, and they can only grow certain grapes. And then they also have to pass a lot of these other steps and qualifications in order to be labeled a Bordeaux. But they do that because they have this belief of what's called terroir. And this basically translates to sense of place. And it's the idea that the terroir, that the grapes were grown, is the most important aspect of the wine. So where they're grown, the geography of that region, the climate of that region. I'm trying to think, there's another piece to it as well. But basically that sense of place, everything about the place where the grapes were grown is the most important aspect about it, not what variety it is. So that's why they don't call, in Bordeaux, they make a lot of Cabernet Sauvignon. So they don't call their wine a Cabernet Sauvignon because they know it's going to taste very different than a Cabernet Sauvignon grown somewhere else in the world. So they want to be specific, and they believe it's like the Bordeaux is what's important. That place of Bordeaux is what makes that wine unique, and that's the thing you should keep an eye on. So that is why some wines are specific to the regions. And then there's rules out there that like you can't call anything else a Bordeaux if it doesn't come from that place, basically to kind of protect that word, and so that you can always expect a certain amount of quality from a Bordeaux wine, or at least you know what to expect from a Bordeaux. Same with all the other regions. Okay. Whew, man, how many we got left here? I think we have 6 left. So we're moving good here. Okay. Why are some wines so much more expensive than others? Oh, this is a good question. I've asked this question so many times. Remember, I love asking why questions. So anything with a why, I'm like, ooh, yeah. So there's a lot of things that go into the cost of wine. Some of these things include the cost of the grapes, if you're just purchasing the grapes from vineyards, or the cost of the land to upkeep the land and harvest the grapes. Does cost a decent amount. The winery's name, that is something that comes into play. Is it famous, well-known, or is it just starting out? Winemaking, so oak barrels. If you're going to use, new oak barrels every year, it's going to cost you a lot of money. Special reserve bottling. These are ones where they have the best grapes. So if that wine used the special reserve wine or the special reserve grapes, it'd be a little more expensive. And then how many hours were spent blending and figuring out that right blend, and how much of an expert is it? Somebody with 20 years experience? Is it somebody who's just starting out? The region can go into play. So what is the going cost of wine in that region? And then also aging. Are you buying the bottle that's been aged already 3 years before you even had to buy it? That took up space in the winery and then also just made it a higher commodity. So there are lots of different aspects that go into it. Yes, some of it is like, is it a well-known wine or not, right? There is some marketing that plays into that, but a lot of it comes down to the cost. So this was a question I asked. I remember I went into a local wine shop here and I asked them, why is it that Washington wine is so much more expensive than like French wine a lot of the times for like your just like equal quality across the board? And one of the major reasons for that is in France, the people who are making the wine own their vineyards and they've owned them in their family for generations. Whereas in Washington, the cost of land out here is very expensive. And wine world is newer in Washington. So a lot of these people have to go out and either buy the land or buy the grapes from the land, in which case it is quite expensive. So that is a big factor in the expensive wines. Okay, next up, I'm interested in wine travel and visiting wineries. Can you provide tips for planning a wine-focused vacation? Oh, absolutely. I love that. So again, this topic could last a whole episode. In fact, I've done an episode all about this. So check out episode 13 linked in the show notes, tips for planning wine travel. And if you're listening to this about when it comes out, if we're before April 2023, be sure to check if I have any spots open for my Walla Walla wine retreat. Love for you to join me. I'll do all the wine planning for you so you don't have to worry about it. You just get to enjoy the trip. But if you want tips for planning your own wine vacation, go check out episode 13. I have a bunch in there. You're also welcome to reach out to me directly, and I'm happy to help you plan. Next up, what's a good wine choice to give as a gift in general? Ooh, this is a hard question because everyone has different tastes. So my go-to answer for this, I think the best wine to give as a gift, if you know nothing about the person's wine taste, is your favorite wine or a wine with a story behind it, especially if it's between you and the other person that you're giving it to. So maybe you're a realtor and someone bought a house in Washington State. Like, choosing your favorite Washington wine would be a great gift to give them because you're shouting out the area that they're new to, right? Washington local, but it's also your favorite. So you can tell a little story behind it, right? Or if you're giving somebody like a birthday gift, it's a friend, and you're thinking about a bottle of wine, but you have no idea what they like, share your favorite bottle because you're essentially sharing a part of yourself in that, and you can explain to them, I love this and I wanted you to try it. You could also do one where, like, if you've visited a winery with that person, grab a bottle from that winery. It's a great way to start it out. The other recommendation I have here is a sparkling wine, though this one's there's a little caveat there because I know there are some people out there that just don't like sparkling. So hopefully you don't run into those people. And if anything, most people can use it in a mimosa. So, but sparkling wine is good for a celebration. So, especially like a birthday, an announcement, a New Year's, any of those things, sparkling wine could be a good option there. Next, how do I navigate a wine list at a restaurant, especially if it's extensive or unfamiliar to me? First tip, don't be afraid to ask for help. A lot of times in these restaurants, if they have an extensive wine list, they have somebody there who knows how to walk you through it. And this person is called a sommelier. And don't worry, it is not their job to get you to spend a lot of money on wine. It is their job to help you understand the wine list and find a wine that you will enjoy. So when you're out to eat, and if there is a sommelier that you can ask about the wine menu, ask to have the sommelier come over and then simply tell them what styles of wine you like, what you're looking for, maybe tell them what you plan on eating for dinner, and then give them your price point, and they will help you find a good wine to match your meal. Now, if you're somewhere where there is not a sommelier to walk you through the wine menu, some other tips is to first figure out how the list is organized. It's usually organized either by region. So you'll see like the French wines and then the Italian wines and the US wines. Sometimes it's organized by grape variety. So you'll see, Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, Cabernet Sauvignon. Just understanding that can help because then once you know that, you can find something that you're familiar with and look around that wine. Because generally, if you like a Chardonnay, you could look in the Chardonnay section and find maybe a different Chardonnay to try. Or if you like a French Burgundy and you end up in the France section, you might be able to find something that's similar. You like the styles of French wine. And then lastly, look at it as just being willing to try something new. I think a lot of times with wine, we always want to go to what's familiar to us and like what we know versus like if you're at a new restaurant, you're probably there to try some new food and you're okay with that. And you might see something on the menu and you don't know every single ingredient in that dish, but you're like, yeah, I'll try it. Have that same attitude towards wine and you might find something you enjoy. Next up, this is a very popular question. I'm not going to go too in depth into it, but I totally understand this question. Why does wine give me a headache? So the two main reasons, and you're not going to like me for this, is it's alcoholic. It has alcohol. So if you drink too much wine and do not drink enough water, you are going to dehydrate, and that is going to give you a headache. The other reason is that a lot of wines contain histamine. So if you ever notice that you get any allergy symptoms afterwards, or like, that stuffy kind of headache where your head feels really full, it could be histamine. So I'm not a doctor by any means, but I have read out there that, taking antihistamine before drinking, and if that helps you, that could be the reason. Again, not a doctor, so please don't take that as medical advice. It is not almost always, or almost never, I should say. It's almost never the sulfites in the wine. The sulfites, the only time that would be the case is if you have a sulfur dioxide or sulfite allergy. And then in which case you also wouldn't eat very many dried fruits. You wouldn't eat frozen French fries. Well, cooked after, obviously, right? But I'm trying to think of some other things. Any of the fruit in the grocery section that is not organic, you would not be eating any of that stuff because those all contain sulfites as well. You might also be getting a headache from the sugar. So if you, a lot of wines, like your mass-produced wines that you find at the grocery store will have some amount of sugar, mostly because they're kind of trying to match the taste of your typical American who, I am guilty of this, loves sugar. So they put a little bit of sugar in the wine to kind of help match your taste. So if you notice that, grocery store wine tends to hit you harder than, let's say, like a nice bottle at a restaurant or one that you purchased at a local wine shop, it might just be the added sugar in the wine as well. All right, we've made it to our last question. And again, if there are more questions that have come up as I've been talking about this, or you want to have your wine questions answered, send them to me, Haley@corkandfizz.com, or find me on Instagram @corkandfizz and send them my way. Okay, last question. I heard of vegan wine recently. Isn't all wine vegan? It's such a great question. Not exactly, unfortunately. I know you're like, it's made with grapes. How is it not vegan? What are you talking about? There's a process in the winemaking process called fining. And fining involves stirring an absorbent substance called a coagulant. Yeah, we're getting fancy. Into the wine when it lies in a barrel or a tank for the purpose of adhering to and removing certain undesirable molecules. This is done to clarify and stabilize the wine before bottling, since most consumers prefer a wine that is not cloudy or excessively tannic. Some of these substances that they use to fine the wine are derived from animal byproducts. So egg whites, casein, which is a milk protein, gelatin, which is typically derived from skin, tendon, and muscle of animals, and isinglass, which is the air bladders from fish. I know, sounds crazy, right? So if these substances were used to fine the wine, technically it's not quite vegan. Now, there are options to fine the wine that are not animal byproducts. So one of the common ones is bentonite, a type of clay, and activated charcoal. So how do you ensure that the wine is vegan? One, you can check the label. More wineries are getting better about labeling their wine as vegan if it is one. You could also look for an unfined, like unfined, unfiltered wine. A lot of natural wines are unfined and unfiltered and are likely vegan. The other thing is just ask. Find a local wine shop where you can trust the people who sell the wine, or go to your local winery and ask them if the wine is vegan. Hoofda, man. Okay, that was fun. Thank you for sending in those questions. I enjoyed answering them so much, and I hope to do this again in a part 2 with even more wine questions. If you loved this episode as much as I did, I would so appreciate if you could take a quick second to rate it and leave a review. And if you know a wine lover in your life that would enjoy it, please share it with them. It would mean the world to me. Now, a few episodes ago, I gave you a sneak peek into my Cork Crew virtual tasting club. You loved it, so I'm doing it again in next week's episode, and this one is extra special. We were lucky enough to have one of the top leading wine professionals, the author of the Wine Bible, Karen McNeil, join us for a Q&A. In this conversation, Karen shares about her life and gives some of the best advice that I've ever heard for those wanting to learn more about wine. So you won't want to miss this. Thanks again for listening, and as a thank you, I'd like to share my free shopping guide, 15 Wines Under $15. Simply head to my website, corkandfizz.com, scroll down to the bottom, and join my mailing list. Cheers!